Happy Tuesday, Dog Nation. Welcome to DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Glad to have you with us. Connor Riley coming up. A lot of talk today about the Georgia Bulldogs' preparations for the upcoming season. Interesting trend to pay attention to in terms of just how legitimate of a national championship contender UGA really is. There's some interesting stuff going on around the SEC, including the continued search for Tennessee defensive coordinator. We'll touch on that. Also, a little bit of a shift there on the Alabama coaching staff, too. We'll hit that before we're done. Have not let you hear from Kirby Smart yet on the acquisition of Will Muschamp as an off-field analyst for Georgia. We'll do some of that today. I'll tell you why. I do think Muschamp's presence at Georgia does matter. So we got a lot of ground to cover. Connor Riley, as I said, also set to join us, but it's important that you're here. It's also important that our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia make it all possible. As DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by ESOG, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I always tell you that DawgNation Daily is the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Now, listen, at this point in time, we're a lot more than a podcast. We're on all kinds of video platforms and radio and everything else. But when we first started this, I always wanted that to kind of be our motto, our slogan, the show for fans, which means I want to think like a fan when I do the show. Now, it happens that I am a fan of the Georgia Bulldogs, but beyond that, I kind of want to present a fan perspective on the show. There's plenty of media doing things for other media. I want to do this for the perspective of the fans. So when I think about sports, I kind of think about how fans think, or at least I try to, and I hope I'm always able to do that. And with that in mind, there's one group of fans in the SEC that I find fascinating. Now, I'm going to make this be about Georgia football, so stay with me just for a second, and I think we'll all kind of arrive at the same point. I've always been, at least in the last few years, been fascinated by Kentucky basketball fans because I think it must be incredibly frustrating to be a Kentucky basketball fan. I'll give you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about. John Calipari's been the coach there, and Calipari has been really good at producing NBA talent, but seemingly not as good as you might expect at turning that NBA talent into a winner there in college. For instance, the other night I saw this stat. This is amazing. Do you realize there were 7 former Kentucky players that had 20 or more points on the same night in the NBA? That's how deep the roster of former Wildcats are in the NBA. So many that 7 of those guys could go for 20 or more on the same night in the NBA. And yet, with all that being said, the Wildcats haven't been in the Final Four, I think, since 2015. Am I right about that? It's been a number of years since Kentucky has kind of used all that NBA talent to get to the Final Four. And if you're a Kentucky fan, that must be incredibly frustrating. Like, you can turn on the TV every night and see Anthony Davis and Karl Anthony Towns and all these guys. But what are they doing when they are in Lexington? And Calipari kind of shrugs that off sometimes. But if you're a Kentucky fan, you're not shrugging that off at all. The whole point of your fandom is watching these guys do something for Big Blue, not for the Lakers, the Timberwolves, or whomever else. In fact, I guess it's kind of gotten so potentially toxic there in Lexington that Pat Forty from Sports Illustrated wrote the other day that Calipari may actually be wearing out his welcome there at Kentucky, and I find that to kind of be fascinating. But it's important to note that while in college basketball you can have this kind of blue blood power who has all kinds of NBA talent, but not really using that to win at a very high level in the college game, at least compared to what you would expect for so many lottery picks, first-round draft picks, things like that. It's important to note that college football really isn't that way at all. You can have the disparate results, a bunch of draft picks in the NBA, not a lot of wins come March. You can have that in college basketball, but it doesn't really seem like you get that very much in college football. For instance, this year's reigning national champion Alabama, look at some of the mock drafts that are out there, they may have as many as 5 first-round picks in this upcoming April's NFL draft. Last year's national champion LSU, in the draft that preceded their winning the national championship, they produced 4 first-round draft picks. The national champion before before that, the Clemson Tigers, they had 3 in the first round, 4 picks taken in the first 40 picks. So the defending national champion in the draft that follows that almost always has the big-time draft success to kind of either validate the national championship season or maybe more accurately said, kind of provide the key data that suggests they were always heading towards that championship. It's just one of the good things about college football. Obviously, the players who play this game, and you don't fault them for feeling this way, they have a selfish ambition in mind. They want to use college football to get to the NFL. But the teams that have the most players who are capable of doing that typically find a way to also win at the high level too. That doesn't work that way in college basketball. The Kentucky example is obviously proof of that. But in college football, Bama this year, LSU the year before that, Clemson the year before that, these teams that have a lot of big-time draft picks just seem to go on to also enjoy a lot of team success there as well. The collective goal of the team and the individual goal of the player seem to be fairly closely aligned with each other, which obviously at this point in time is where we get to Georgia football. And honesty compels me to admit that one of the things you'd like to see more of from Georgia in its pursuit of a national championship and the questions related to how soon can it get there and how on track is Georgia to kind of join the Alabamas, the Clemsons, the LSUs, the teams that I just mentioned who've won the recent national championships. What you do on the NFL draft, how many guys you put in that first round is a pretty good indicator. It's a pretty good predictor of exactly what either you did this past season or what you could be on track to do in future seasons. That pipeline of former 4- and 5-star recruits coming through your program over the course of 3 or a 4-year span and then leaving as guys who get to shake Roger Goodell's hand in a non-pandemic world, of course, but guys who get to shake Roger Goodell's hand, guys who go on to make the big-time bucks. That's how you produce the kind of business decision mantra, the way that Terry and Arnold described that for Alabama and Nick Saban has sold that program so well on. That's what Georgia's aspiring to. So with that in mind, there will be a lot of attention paid to what happens for Georgia in this upcoming NFL draft. How many guys does Georgia put in the first round of this draft? And as you start thinking ahead to next year's draft, how many of the guys who chose to stay at UGA for one more year, how many of them can also kind of be those guys taken amongst the first 32 picks? With that in mind, when Kirby Smart spoke to folks last week around kind of National Signing Day, even though it wasn't quite a National Signing Day, for Georgia, their recruiting work was done in December. One of the questions that Smart did get asked was the guys who chose to leave the program, what do you say about them? The guys who chose to remain, how good a shape are you in? And Smart, as you might imagine, when it comes to a topic like this, chose to use his words carefully. I think Smart's got to play the political game on this, but this is what Kirby Smart said.
I don't get real heavily involved and put emotions into those decisions because we do the best we can to educate those guys and give them information, and ultimately each player and his family have to make those decisions. So I look at it as, it's an investment in them, and we spend a lot of money on getting the information, whether it's the services we get, talking to NFL teams, traveling to visit with parents. We invest a lot of time and energy into getting them good information to make a good decision, but it's up to each and every guy. And I'm not very critical of the decisions guys make. I don't think you actually know if you made the right decision or not, because there's probably not a wrong decision. It's more what suits the needs of others. Some guys have graduated and it's on to the next step. Other guys maybe are close to graduation, and I think it's time for them to make that leap. But we certainly support those guys. I'm looking forward to seeing those guys work out and train, and we're fired up about the guys that decided to return.
So Smart's going to be careful with his words there. He's obviously not going to criticize any player who's chosen to move on the NFL draft, nor is he going to make it seem like he tried too hard to keep them from doing what they want to do, because obviously the eyes of future recruits are always watching this kind of stuff. Their ears are listening close to hear what Kirby Smart has to say. But if some of the guys who did leave as juniors had more eligibility at Georgia and chose to come back, if they were to leave and not be taken in the first round, it does become fair to say, would it be better for those individual players if they had been back at Georgia another year and gave themselves a chance at that kind of financial reward that can come for being a first-round pick? And on this show, we do care about Georgia football. In addition to liking the players, we care about the team that they played for. It obviously would have been good for Georgia if they chose to do that. So, when you look at some of the mock drafts that are out there right now, it's amazing kind of the wide range of predictions that you see. Some of y'all follow this stuff very, very closely. You can check my work on this. We'll talk to Connor Riley. I'll also about this coming up in a moment. But it seems like to me, Georgia has, of all the guys it's about to put into this upcoming NFL draft, Georgia's got 3 guys who have a chance to be a first-round pick. It certainly seems like Azeez Ojulari is the most likely of the former Georgia players to be selected in the first round here this year. And then there's a chance that Tyson Campbell might be a first-round pick, and there's a chance that Eric Stokes might be a first-round pick. And I use the words might and maybe here because in one case, I think I saw one of the NFL.com mock drafts that did have Stokes going the first round, but another one that had him, outside the first round. I've seen Tyson Campbell projected as a first round in some mocks, but I've seen him as low as a third-round pick in some others. I have seen Azeez Ojulari in virtually every first-round mock I've seen, but I believe there was a CBS Sports kind of, rating of draft prospects of the day that kind of had him somewhere along the lines of prospect number 55 or somewhere along those lines. So at least one projection that at least suggests the possibility that Ojulari might not be taken in the first round. And this is more than just, kind of making college football into a feeder system minor league for the NFL. As I said before, there's a pretty close tie right now, pretty close connection between teams who are producing the big-time draft picks and the teams who are winning, national championships. The teams that are doing that, the Alabamas, the Clemsons, the LSUs, they're the ones who've been producing these multiple first-round draft picks in recent years. And you want Georgia to be the same kind of NFL pipeline. For reasons, by the way, beyond just winning a national championship, it also potentially becomes fodder for negative recruiting if you don't do that. So I think the lead up to this upcoming spring is going to be really interesting. The next frontier for the Georgia program. There's obviously a lot of very good players in this program, and there are a lot of guys who've left this program, had a chance to move on to the NFL draft, and guys who are enjoying NFL careers right now. So where Nate Patrick just got picked up by another team recently. There are a lot of guys who've played at Georgia who are playing in the NFL, but the next frontier for the Dogs is to produce the same kind of first-round picks, multiple guys, year after year after year, the way the very best programs in college football have done, and that's one of the things we'll be watching from UGA come this spring. Now, while I'm on the subject of the NFL draft, what's going to happen there, let me also kind of bring this to mind. I saw a very fun tweet from Malik Herring, former Georgia defensive lineman, who obviously tore his ACL around the Senior Bowl, and that's a terrible setback for him, for a guy that I think all of us really love and enjoy, but certainly Herring seems to be in good spirits here. For those of you watching in video, I'll show this to you. He loves apparently Frosted Flakes cereal, and so on Twitter he says, came home to some Frosted Flakes after surgery, been loving them since I was 5. It must have them on the road to recovery. I don't know if this is on his way to an endorsement for the cereal or not, but it's nice to see a smile on Herring's face, and good to see the all the cereal there around him as he gets ready to go through a recovery. So we wish Malik the best. And for all the UGA guys who are trying to make a way for themselves in the NFL, we wish them well for that. Not just because it benefits them, although we're happy that they get a chance to make some money, but obviously because Georgia benefits as well when it is viewed as the kind of program that is a pipeline to the NFL. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Good to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today, live on video, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. It's been great to be on Twitch here over the course of the last few days, having fun with that. We'll tell you that if you're looking for us on Twitch, we are DawgNation UGA on Twitch. That may be the best way for you to search that. You can watch the show the same way you watch it on all the other video platforms. If that's a video platform you're already spending a lot of time on, great way to get us there on Twitch. At DawgNation UGA on Twitch. You can check that out. Of course, all the podcast platforms as well. Radio with our friends in Athens on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Just really happy to have you as a part of the program today. Of course, it's Connor Riley coming up in a moment, and all of it made possible today by our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. You know, when it comes to a couple of the real significant issues that homeowners can face, water creeping into your basement, your garage, your crawl space, cracks in your foundation. Those are the kinds of things that can generate a lot of worry. I'm here to take some of that worry away from you, though, because when you've got a problem, you want a company that's good at providing solutions, and that's what Engineered Solutions of Georgia is known for. They are a solutions-based company. That's why they've got the word solutions right there in their name. So when it comes to your waterproofing and foundation issues, trust me, ESOG can be a solution to those problems. They're also a proud partner of UGA, makes them fun to do business with. They've got 2 full-time engineers on staff. These are really smart folks. They've been good friends of ours here at DawgNation DawgNation Daily for a long time. So please give them a call. The number could not be easy to remember. It's 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now, and that'll get you in touch with my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. All right, before we get Connor Riley today on DawgNation Daily presented by ESOG, I want to go around the doghouse here for a moment. We talked a lot about Will Muschamp in the lead up to him coming to Georgia. Now it's official. Muschamp is on the Georgia staff. Last week when Kirby Smart met with reporters, he did kind of talk about some of the details related to Muschamp. And so as we kind of close the book on this chapter of will he be at UGA, won't he, I did want to at least give you a chance to hear a little bit of the audio from Kirby talking about this and a couple things to say about Muschamp in relationship to that. Here is first Kirby confirming that, yes, the former Florida and South Carolina coach will indeed be an off-field UGA staffer. Here's Kirby.
As of last week, we were able to get things completed with Will. He'll be joining our staff in a off-the-field role. We call it an analyst, and he's already made a lot of strides in terms of helping me, helping our staff. He'll be able to help coach the coaches, and he'll be working with the defensive side of the ball. But it's very, very valuable to have a guy that's been a head coach at two places in our conference. He knows the ins and outs of this conference. He'll be able to help our staff, our coaches, in a lot of ways. And I'm excited to be able to have him join us.
I am so sick of those teleconference press conferences. And listen, that's not a shot at Georgia. They're doing everything they can to provide access to coaches, players, things like that. But you get all those dings and all those noises that kind of show up on these Zoom-style press conferences. I'll be so glad to get back to normal when it comes to stuff like that, obviously for more ways than one. But in reference to Will Muschamp there, I've kind of jokingly, half kidding, half jokingly said that one of the things that I think that Muschamp has the potential to provide for Georgia, this is a guy who coached an in-state rivalry against Clemson year after year after year. And obviously the cynical among you would say, yeah, but he didn't have any success in those games, and that's certainly true. But there is something really gained from a knowledge standpoint when you watch the same team on film as often as Muschamp did that related to Clemson. I wonder, could there possibly be some sort of nugget, some sort of thing that Muschamp has picked up over the years that maybe he didn't have enough talent to exploit when he was the coach at South Carolina, but giving a chance to share this with Dan Lanning or share this with Kirby Smart, something that Georgia might be able to do in that Week 1 game against Clemson, in a game that expects to be as tightly contested and as close as Georgia-Clemson might be. Any little edge might matter, and who knows, maybe there's a chance that Muschamp is able to provide that. If he does, the couple $100,000 that he's making, trust me, a win against Clemson would be worth at least that much to a UGA. Maybe something to keep in mind. One more from Kirby on kind of how all this came to be and what Muschamp's future aspirations are while kind of parked at Georgia for at least right now. Here's Kirby again.
I would say that anytime you're an aspiring coach, you want to get on the field and get an opportunity to go coach on the grass. I know he's not through his coaching days. That's really important for him to be able to get out there and have the relationships and go develop a position group and coach. So I know that's important to him, and his family's been his focus here recently because I know he feels like he's moved his family all over the country, and this is an opportunity for him to give back to them and be with them and be able to watch his son play.
I like that phrasing from Kirby, coaching on the grass. That's obviously what he means when he says an on-field coach. I think there have been some Florida recruiting classes over the years that were probably pretty comfortable playing on grass. But in this case, Kirby talking about Muschamp coaching on the grass, which I think is really interesting. And, off the top of the show, I spent some time saying that, for Georgia to be the best program it can be, to be the most attractive to future recruits, you want to show a verifiable pipeline from big-time signee to first-round draft pick. You want to be that kind of professional development organization. You want to get the most out of talent and put players at the top end of the NFL draft. That's just an example of Georgia at its best. I think the same thing can be said from the coaching ranks as well, because over the course of a number of years, you will hire a bunch of coaches. I think, Nick Saban, Alabama, going to be hiring 5 new coaches again this year. That's just kind of what happens when you get to be a power program. You've got guys that have to be replaced each and every year. And the way to make sure that, much like you want to have a pipeline of good players into your program, that you also have a good pipeline of good assistants in your program is bring guys in for a little bit, let them get a promotion on the other side. Look at Charlton Warren. Came in at Georgia as a defensive backs coach, leaves the program as a defensive coordinator. Someone like Dan Lanning could be leaving in the future to go be a head coach. That's exactly what Mel Tucker did. Came through here as defensive coordinator. Now he's making big bucks at Michigan State after a brief stopover at Colorado. That's exactly what you want to be able to do. So the notion that Kirby could be kind of a reclamation figure for Will Muschamp, much the same way that Nick Saban has been for guys like Lane Kiffin and guys like Steve Sarkisian, I think that's good for the program overall. So interesting to hear Kirby Smart kind of confirm some of the Muschamp stuff last week after weirdly refusing to do that for a while. But Muschamp is here, and I think to the extent that it matters, it's probably good for UGA. All right, it's good to have you with us here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. I want to talk more to Connor Riley here about some of the stuff I addressed off the top of the program, but Connor also had a really good piece at DawgNation.com looking at kind of some of the stuff we addressed yesterday related to lines of scrimmage and how much that matters for Georgia and really any team at any level of the sport trying to compete for a championship. We'll do that with Connor and a really fun look at the 2022 recruiting class as well. So good to have him and you with us here today. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
And by the way, I will tell you, it's a Kroger Fresh Take with our buddy Connor Riley right now. Great to have him on the program today and really appreciate our friends from Kroger for making all this possible. Connor, I know you follow the draft really closely, so I'm curious to kind of get your thoughts on a subject that I was just speaking about before, that if you look at college football in comparison to college basketball, there's not always a huge correlation in college basketball between teams who produce NBA draft picks and teams who go on to win national championships and Final Fours, things like that. Kentucky is the perfect point on that. Haven't been in the Final Four since 2015. Whereas in college football, Bama may have 5 first-round picks this year. LSU had a ton last year. Clemson had a ton in 2018. There seems to be a pretty strong bond between draft success and championship success. And I would suggest, honesty compelling me to admit here, that's kind of the next frontier for Georgia. I do think Georgia needs to produce more first-round draft picks if it wants to be a true, legitimate national championship contender, the likes of which the very best programs in the country do. Do you agree with me on that, and how close do you think Georgia is to being able to do that?
Yeah, so we've seen following sort of Georgia's draft progression under Kirby Smart, them go from a team that can produce usually one first-round draft pick a year, you think DeAndre Baker in 2018, to a place where now, last year they get Andrew Thomas and Isaiah Wilson. This year it looks like they'll definitely get Azeez Ojulari and maybe Tyson Campbell in there. They need to make that step where they've gone from 1 to 2. Now they need to figure out a way to go from 2 to 3 and then 3 to 4, because that's where Alabama, that's where Clemson usually exists, that's where Ohio State exists year in, year out in terms of producing top talent. And obviously, there are some years that are outliers, but Georgia needs to get to a place consistently like Alabama is where, all right, they had 2 wide receivers go in the first round last year, and then they have 2 more that are going to go this year.
So with that in mind, do you think, because you certainly follow this draft stuff very closely, would you call Azeez Ojulari a first-round lock?
I'm pretty close to it. I'd like to see maybe how he tests, specifically in like the 3-cone and short shuttle drills. So I think that's going to be where things are best for him. But based off what I've read and I've seen, I would feel pretty comfortable saying Azeez Ojulari is going to be a first-round pick right now.
How about Tyson Campbell? More likely in the first round, more likely out of the first round?
I would probably say out based on tape. But again, if he comes out and he runs a sub-4.35 or a sub-4.40, he's probably going to end up playing himself into being a first-round draft pick. I know not everyone, Campbell didn't necessarily have the year everyone thought he was going to have. He still played pretty well over the course of the season. And again, I think Eric Stokes is a better cornerback for Georgia, and that's why he's going to be a second-round draft pick. But Campbell, the reason Campbell was a 5-star is because of his measurables, and those measurables are going to be what ends up potentially, if he is a first-round pick, being why that is the case.
So in the case of Campbell, I want to ask you about Stokes in a moment, but in the case of Campbell, my thought on this is, and listen, I don't take great pleasure in saying this, but if Campbell comes in at Georgia as a 5-star, leaves after 3 years, and he's not a first-round pick, Connor, it's hard for me not to view that as a lost opportunity for Campbell and really a lost opportunity for Georgia as well. And I don't, revel in saying that, but I just think it's objectively true.
Would you consider the same with DeAndre Swift?
I mean, maybe so. Although I would think that running back is a little bit different than cornerback on that. That, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it seems like the shelf life on running back's a little shorter. So you could say the same thing about Swift, but he was certainly taken very high in the second round from that standpoint. So I guess I would treat the defensive backs and the cornerbacks a little bit differently on that. I mean, sorry, the running backs and the defensive backs a little bit differently.
No, I get what you're saying, but if you want to go that route and say 5-star, 3 years, and he's not a first round pick, I mean, Spencer Campbell, he's a second round lock, I feel. So.
Sure.
A day one, day two pick, I still feel like, you're getting bang for your buck. You just need to find a way to get those guys to be first-round draft picks. Azeez Ojulari wasn't a 5-star, and, you look at that 2018 class, you have a guy like Brenton Cox who's still going to be in college next year, so there's some offense there. I get the larger point you're making. I just think that's maybe a little bit of a slippery slope there if you want to go one specific example over the course of everything else.
And let me join you on something, because I think you're making a good point on this, that if you're Campbell and you get taken in the second round, odds are you're on your way towards a sterling, shouldn't say sterling, you're on your way to a potential of a very good NFL career. You're off to a good start there. I think I'm thinking about this more from the fact that, to me, I view that as fodder for negative recruiting against Georgia, not necessarily against Campbell, who would have a chance to have a pretty nice career, but it becomes the kind of thing that you could potentially ding Georgia on if you were some nefarious-minded coach who's trying to be a rival in the recruiting trail.
Right, and to push back on that, I would say DeAndre Baker was a 3-star that got turned into a first-round draft pick. Eric Stokes is a 3-star prospect who is going to be turned into a second-round draft pick. Georgia, I think, should feel very comfortable with its development of defensive back players right now and not necessarily have to worry about potential negative recruiting aspects.
Let me ask you one more on this topic, then I want to shift gears here for a moment. Is Eric Stokes the only other name that you kind of think of as that first-round potential for Georgia? And I guess what are the chances that Stokes does hear his name called among the first 32?
Yeah, Stokes is probably the only other one. I think Trey Hill's maybe a third or a fourth-round pick, and Ben Cleveland's third or fourth round as well. Again, if he goes out and he runs really well, and Eric Stokes is a gifted sprinter. Obviously we all know the Nick Chubb pick from years ago and his time at Eastside High School there. So if he goes out and runs really well, again, with cornerbacks, that's a huge differentiator because, and especially with Stokes, he's got the on-field production and the on-field talent to back that up. So I could, if he runs well at Georgia's Pro Day, and not having a combine this year, I think really hurts guys like Campbell, Azeez, and Stokes because they didn't get a chance to go play in the Senior Bowl. And those guys who cement their first-round draft status or possibly earn their first-round draft status, they need to test really well.
Yeah, I think that's really true. Yesterday we talked a little bit about how the Super Bowl, I think, kind of impacts the way you think about football going forward. You kind of wrote about this a little bit at DawgNation.com as well. It's kind of funny. I seem to kind of take this more from the approach of, man, when you have a good pass rush, you can neutralize even a very good offense. That's what the Bucs did to the Kansas City Chiefs. I think you're right to point out that part of the way in which that happened was the Chiefs had some real issues along the offensive line. So, Connor, when you try to make the comparison between all of that and Georgia, I do think it tells you two things. As you kind of wrote about, Georgia's going to make sure its offensive line is locked away for the upcoming season because as good as JT Daniels might be, as good as George Pickens might be, as good as all these running backs might be, if you don't have those 5 guys along the offensive line figured out, you could be stymied just as easily as the Chiefs were on Sunday. And, by the way, as we're all trying to figure out how you go out there and you stop these high-powered offenses, a little pass rush goes a long way in that regard, does it not?
Yeah, no, it does. And there was one player, specifically when you look at Georgia, that I came away just really fascinated with. To me, the best player on Tampa's defense on Saturday, or the most impactful one, I would say was Vita Vea. He is a 350-pound nose tackle who, as we saw in that game, can also do a little bit of pass rushing. And you think to this Georgia team, do we see that with Jordan Davis? Because, yes, Jalen Carter and Trayvon Walker are really gifted, high upside players. But I think with Jordan Davis, again, what he does in the run is similar to what Vea does at the NFL level. Tampa was first in the NFL this year in run defense. While Vea missed some time, he's a significant reason why that's the case. Jordan Davis makes Georgia the best run defense in the entire country. And I think if you're able to find ways to turn him into a more effective pass rusher, put him in situations out there where you do have him out there on third down, and if that eats in the snaps of Trayvon Walker or Jalen Carter, I understand that's a tough decision you have to make, but it's a good decision you have to make. And if he's able to develop as a pass rusher, that's going to make things so much harder for the opposing offensive line and so much easier for a Nolan Smith, a Adam Anderson, a Channing Tindall, those types of guys. And that was really, again, Tom Brady won the MVP. Tom Brady should not have won Super Bowl MVP. You can give it to a Tampa linebacker. You could have given it to anyone on that Tampa defense, in my opinion, because that was the reason that Tampa Bay won that game.
Yeah, we talked about Devin White a little bit yesterday, too, in that regard. And it's funny you're mentioning Davis, the defensive line. Listen, I'm not going to pretend to be some sort of former coach or anything like that, but I do feel like I follow football closely enough to know that when I see what Tampa appeared to be doing against Kansas City, kind of famously with the two safeties back, things like that, that for the most part, playing safeties back like that in college football and trying to keep everything underneath you against really good offense, I just don't really think it works very much. If you try to do that against Alabama, they'll just run the ball with Najee Harris. And so, and there are a lot of examples, similar to that. So if you do have the inside linebacker who's, covering the middle of the field like White, if you do have the interior defensive line presence, like you mentioned with what Jordan Davis has a chance to be, all of a sudden maybe you can be a little more conservative with your defensive back play because you're handling your business in front of those guys. And obviously in college, it's just kind of hard to have all those boxes kind of squared away and checked off. But clearly we saw a Tampa scheme that did on Sunday what almost no one ever does on Saturday, which is take an offense that used to score at will and really turn the volume down on that in a big game.
Yeah, I feel like the NFL and college football are just different sports right now. Defenses, I think if you have a good game plan, you can still be really effective, as I think you saw on Sunday. Whereas in college, I just don't know how much that's true. And you can look at Kansas City. They were without Mitchell Schwartz for a while, and then they lose their left tackle, Eric Fisher, and their whole offensive line falls apart. You go back to even the Georgia-Alabama national championship game. Jordan Williams was one of the best offensive linemen in the country that year. He goes down in the title game with an injury, and they just plop in Alex Leatherwood, and he holds up really well, and he's going to go be, I think a second or a third round draft pick this year. I just think the depth affects college football so much significantly more than it does at the NFL level that it makes it really hard to see what they're doing at the NFL and wonder how that even remotely translates to the college level.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, listen, you've just got these mismatch on the inside, right? It's like a lot of teams have a slot receiver that's just going to be way better than any kind of like, nickelback or anything like that might be covering him. I mean, some of the stuff that happens in the middle of the field, for these college teams right now, there's just in some cases a significant talent advantage that becomes very hard to kind of devise any scheme to go out there and combat. At least that's what we seem to be seeing a lot in these college football Saturdays.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's something that does need to be rectified or, how you go about doing it. I think Some have floated around the idea of moving scholarship numbers down from 85 to 70. I think that impacted a little bit. But, I mean, okay, you add more talent to the middle class of college football, but Georgia's still going to have the 70 best players. Alabama's still going to get the 70 best players in the country. So I still think with just the way the inequity in college football right now, it doesn't lend itself to seeing something like we're going to see, like we saw on Sunday with Tampa Bay and Kansas City.
And the flip side, just to kind of, bring what you kind of wrote to the forefront a little bit more, when it comes to that, Georgia offensive line, especially at left tackle, we're going to talk more about this, later on this week on this show, but really identifying what you want to do at both your tackle spots. I think the average Georgia fan feels pretty good about McClendon. I think you probably should, but seeing someone emerge that gives Georgia the luxury of moving Jamari Salyer inside to left guard, which is what I believe is probably the best possible five for Georgia, including him at left guard. That's a national championship choice to me. I don't want to overstate it, but finding a dominant left tackle to allow Salyer to play a more natural position for him, I think that's the way you turn a very, 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 very good Georgia offense potentially into something that's even better than that, bordering on great, what you're able to do with those open spots along your offensive line.
Yeah, way back when before Georgia played Alabama, they were coming off a game against Tennessee, and one of the big talking points was Tennessee's offensive line. And you could tell from Kirby Smart, Alabama's offensive line was way better than what Tennessee had. And Alabama had the best offensive line in the country. They had an Outland winner in Leatherwood, Remington Award winner in Landon Dickerson. They won the Joe Moore Award. And I know, like, secondary, obviously they have the most to replace there, but as you laid out there, I think from a championship perspective, if there's a position group that needs to get better, it's the offensive line. And specifically, you look at that left tackle. I think Jamari Salyer, if Georgia wanted to, they could say, hey, Jamari, we know left guard's your future, but we feel confident and comfortable with you at left tackle. I think that'd be fine. I think if you're a Georgia fan or a Georgia supporter, you want to see a guy like a Broderick Jones, a Xavier Truss, a Marius Mims come out, play well, win that left tackle job so that you can move Sawyer inside and you feel more comfortable about doing that. And to me, I'll probably have something on this later this week. To me, that's the most interesting positional battle to watch is what does Georgia do at left tackle, because you can make a case they flip McClendon over there and try to figure something out at right tackle. Mm-hmm. You could say Sawyer starts there, and then you have those three highly touted players in suspension. So it's a really interesting position battle that I'm looking forward to seeing play out this spring.
Yeah, listen, I think the comparison here really quick, because I've got something else I want to do with you before we let you go, but, Isaiah Wilson steps onto the Georgia campus in 2017 and took a year to learn, and I think he himself admitted that he wasn't quite ready for all of this when he first got here. Andrew Thomas was more game ready as a freshman, but by 2018, I thought that Isaiah Wilson was playing a very high level for Georgia as a redshirt freshman. So when you start thinking about these guys like a Jones or a Ratledge, a year older, more chance to come in here and compete, that, even one of these guys that doesn't have playing experience, at least a ton of it, but does have experience on campus, that could be utilized for Georgia. Now, listen, there's a part of that that's just wishful thinking on my part, because I'd love to project one of those guys into a role like that, but there is a track record within the last couple of years of someone watching for a year, learning for a year, and really stepping on the field and doing some big things for Georgia the following year.
Right, you look at Cedric Von Braun or something like that, and even Amarius Mims. I know he's going to be a freshman. This will be his first year, but he's already enrolled, and he doesn't have the physical questions that we had with Broderick Jones a season ago. He is as physically impressive and an offensive lineman, or maybe even an all-around prospect that we've seen Georgia sign. And unlike Jones a season ago, and I believe Ratledge as well, Mims is already on campus. He was on campus for bowl practices, and he'll go through spring drills. So, what Georgia does with him, obviously he could sit a year, but Georgia has options at left tackle, and I think it's up to the guys in that room to figure out who is going to be the best and who's going to help this Georgia team accomplish some of those goals.
I want to talk some recruiting with you before I let you go. It's our Kroger Fresh Check with Connor Riley here on DawgNation Daily, and obviously as you head towards Valentine's weekend, Kroger, great source on that, whether it's the candy you need for a gift or all the items you need for that home-cooked meal. There's a lot of really fun cards, all that kind of stuff. You can get stocked up for all your Valentine's needs right there at Kroger. Website to remember, it's Kroger.com/Valentines. That's Kroger.com/Valentines. Get stocked up for the big day. February 14th will be here around the corner, so get ready for that at Kroger, Kroger.com/Valentines for more on that. Connor, you wrote the 22 names to know for the 2022 class for Georgia. I know you've done this before for last cycle. Maybe you've done that for previous cycles as well. I just happen to remember the one from a year ago. And when you look at these kind of names to know for the 2022 class, what I kind of find interesting about this is how many of these names we actually already know. Georgia has more commitments than it had, and you've kind of touched on this before, than this time a year ago. We're also heading into a period in March where a lot of the other names who are not commitments are going to make their decision, either for the good or for the bad for Georgia. It just seems like a lot of stuff related to 2022 is accelerated, in my mind at least anyway, compared to where things stood for 2021, both for guys in the fold and guys who are on the verge of making a big decision here. So with that in mind, kind of give us a little bit of a thumbnail sketch for how you see things with the 2022 class right now.
It's really interesting because I asked Kirby about this on National Signing Day last week. Why did he think that was the case? And part of it just goes back to the lack of visits, the inability of these guys to go check out campuses and see the schools and say, all right, I've got a lot to think of and process right now. And the reality is, a lot of these 2022 kids, they were still getting hit up on the phones for FaceTimes and Zooms, and they're probably tired with it and done with it as well, as we sort of saw in that 2021 cycle. And the lack of visits, I think, really attributed to some of these guys deciding earlier, hey, I feel comfortable with the Georgia staff, and I know what I'm doing, and I know that's where I want to go play. 7 out of the 8 commitments right now from the state of Georgia. It figures to be, right now, another top-heavy Georgia class, especially from some of the guys still out there. I think the most important date to know right now when it comes to 2022 recruiting is April 15th, because that is the day the NCAA's current dead period is set to expire. And the NCAA is going to have to make a decision here shortly on what does it want to do with this dead period. Does it want to turn it into a quiet period where prospects can go visit schools, but schools can't go out and visit prospects out at their high schools? Does it want to extend this dead period? What does it want to do there? Because, and they're going to have to do this quickly because schools like Georgia, they have their spring game on April 17th. And that is absolutely, if there is no dead period, Georgia is going to be recruiting. So they're going to want to have an idea or a framework of what's safe and what's going to allow us to host these recruits to show this off. And you wonder with all these commitments, you wonder if the visits opening back up maybe gives some kids some second thoughts, allows them to back off their pledge and go visit elsewhere. So that April 15th dead period date is really interesting, and the effect that'll have on this class, I think, is going to be really interesting and worth watching.
Boy, that's a great setup for what's going to be out of the course of the weeks to come here. Fascinating stuff, and obviously we're all cheering for the world to get back to normal, people to get healthy, these vaccines to get spread out, and we can have a more normal recruiting cycle with a chance to see Georgia go out there and try to produce the top class, and a chance to maybe host some recruits here coming up pretty soon would certainly be a nice step in the right direction on all of that. Connor, thanks for being here as part of our Kroger Fresh Take here today. I look forward to reading a whole bunch more from you at there, DawgNation.com. Appreciate your insight, and I will look forward to chatting with you soon.
Yep, BA, as always, it is a pleasure, and I will not be on with you on Friday, but happy early birthday.
Hey, I appreciate that. Thank you for remembering.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Impressive that Connor remembered that. My birthday is coming up. I should also say this, that we got a little bit of a scheduling issue. Now, I'm not going to be off because it's my birthday. It just happens to be kind of a coincidence. But we are live today as per usual. We are live tomorrow like normal. But we are pre-recording shows for Thursday, for Friday, and for Monday. And I hope that you'll check these shows out because we're really working hard to make these very entertaining, informative. I've got some really good stuff with Jeff Sintel, kind of the final bow on the 2021 class, the big names to know, who can contribute right away, a really deep look at some of those guys. Jeff and I actually didn't get a chance to do much of that related, going back to December, so I wanted to do some of that right now. So Jeff's actually going to be with us 3 days, Thursday, Friday, and Monday, deep dive into UGA recruiting. That's going to be fascinating. There's a couple of hot takes that are kind of floating out there about Georgia that I want to kind of push back on. We're going to do some of that over the course of the next couple of days. So it's going to be, I think it's going to be really fun. Kirby Smart said something fascinating the other day that I think really works well in terms of describing the current mindset of the Georgia program. So we've got some really, really good stuff planned, and we're doing all of that coming up here over the course of the next couple of days. DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG, live tomorrow, just like always, pre-recorded Thursday, Friday, and Monday, and then back normal after that coming up on Tuesday. So that's the scheduling situation related to all of that. Now let's do our SEC through. And it certainly seems like Tennessee is trying to pull out all the stops right now to potentially hire Al Washington, the linebackers coach at Ohio State, as the next defensive coordinator. This has obviously been a tough situation for Heupel in that a lot of eyes on who they're going to hire. It seems like a lot of things they've tried just haven't quite worked. Heupel's had a weird situation at the start of his tenure here as Vols coach related to some high school staffs who've been unhappy with him. I think it's a quick learning curve for someone like Heupel that, you can be offensive coordinator at Missouri, and for the most part, you can live with anonymity. You can be head coach at UCF, even coming on the heels of kind of the embarrassing, declared national championship before Heupel got there in 2017. But for the most part, people in Orlando are worried about Disney World. They're not worried about UCF college football. And so you can kind of live in kind of a shadow there. But everything you do at Tennessee is going to get noticed. And, when you're working to hire defensive coordinator, if it seems like you're straining too hard, if it seems like it's taking too long, people are just going to be paying close attention to that. Now, there's also a thing at times where the the stress of maybe getting turned down, not getting who you want, kind of leads you in a creative direction. There are certainly a lot of assistants on this Ohio State staff who've been there, who are Larry Johnson, the defensive line coach, kind of comes to mind. There are guys, coaching positions at a place like Ohio State who are, pretty sharp guys that maybe through all of this, it actually leads to a process that actually ends up with a better defensive coordinator than you started with. But these are early days for Heupel, and in these early days, certainly I think he's noticing just how much he gets noticed, and there are a lot of folks waiting to say, see, I told you so, for a hire that they think is not going to go well. That's the sign that Josh Heupel has on his back right there. Elsewhere, when it comes to SEC coaching staffs, did think it was interesting that Carl Scott is leaving Alabama to go be defensive backs coach in the NFL with the Minnesota Vikings. We've said this before, that it seems like, I don't have the numbers to back this up. Maybe if I really investigated this, it wouldn't be as true as it seems like it is. But boy, it seems like there's a lot of college coaches leaving right now for the NFL. Lateral, jobs, position coach to position coach type stuff. Some of this kind of stuff always happens. Maybe it's not happening right now as much as it seems like it is. But, man, it sure does seem like it is. And, this is another one of those examples of head-to-head battle. Georgia fighting for, Terry and Arnold. Arnold goes to Alabama. Lo and behold, Carl Scott's now on his way to the NFL. The timing of all these things, I guess there's never really a great time for an assistant coach to leave. But the timing, on some of this stuff right after signing day always seems just a little bit weird. But nonetheless, Carl Scott is leaving Alabama, moving on the NFL, and another offseason where Nick Saban's got to replace a lot of assistant coaches. He's been doing this seemingly fine in every one of those instances. I guess there was a little unhappiness with the 2018 staff, the team that lost in the national championship game to Clemson. But for the most part, Nick Saban has gotten very used to replacing these coaching staffs. And then finally for our SEC throw, I wanted to mention this. Bud Elliott, who I think does good work for 24/7 Sports, was writing the other day about a kind of an interesting trend in college football. So there are a lot of programs right now who are a lot more content to kind of go transfer portal than they are letter of intent for a player out of high school for a guy that may not have had a senior season or a player that the program may not felt like they had a great chance to evaluate. I think it was Texas State, that didn't sign any players out of high school this particular year. Obviously, most of the power programs are a lot different than that. But in Elliott's case, he pointed out there are actually 200 fewer players this year signed college scholarships than previous years because of what we can assume is a trend towards programs wanting to lean on players in the transfer portal, guys that they've at least seen in a college field before, as opposed to a high school guy they haven't had much of a chance to evaluate yet. Here's what I take this to mean. There's always this fixation on trying to do right by players. And obviously the people who want to do right by players think they're acting in the players' best interest. The obsession in Congress, for instance, when it comes to name, image, and likeness, or the NCAA saying, hey, we're going to give you an extra year of eligibility. We're going to do right by players. But, if you really listen to the players, what they want, I think many of them would say, I just want a chance to play college football. So through all of this obsession with, doing right by the players and some of the things that people seem to get fixated on, lo and behold, we're talking about a year in which 200 fewer people, 200 fewer guys are going to get a chance to play college football. How is that doing right by players? It sort of seems like the people who supposedly are aggrieved on behalf of players, I would suggest, don't really listen to what it is the players want. They want a chance to play. They want a scholarship. They want to better their lives. And we actually live in a world right now where fewer guys are going to get a chance to do that. I almost wish that some of the senators and Congress people that are kind of fixated on this stuff would kind of pay more attention to that kind of thing as opposed to grandstanding and trying to get attention for issues that the average college football player I actually don't think cares very much about. But nonetheless, we'll make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, we always do our golden shoe every day. And one of the things I've been hearing from some of you is, hey, BA, I love doing the Gator hater stuff, and I love the golden shoe as a reward for someone who's kind of been hating on the Gators, and people seem to be happy with that. But a lot of folks are saying I'm not quite done with the Tennessee thing yet. In fact, some people were critical of that. I had gotten some really fun Photoshop edits of the McDonald's thing related to Jeremy Pruitt and the McDonald's bag full of money and stuff like that. We've been getting some good submissions on that. I haven't really been using. People said they want to see more of that. They're not quite done with that yet. So today I'm going to give myself the golden shoe, and I'm actually going to put a prop on our set from now on. So here is at least until they tell me I can't do this anymore because it's free advertising. So here is my own McDonald's bag full of money. I'm going to put this right here, and that's going to be our prop from now on to give you a little love on that. By the way, Gator Hater Countdown, we'll still do that every day as well. 263 days. Thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Y'all have a great day, everybody. All right, and on video, can we get a shot of this? I don't know if we can get the camera down there on that. So for those people who kind of want a little more Tennessee hate on the program that had some fun with that, here's our new little prop here. That's our own McDonald's bag full of money. Eventually, they're going to tell me I have to stop doing this because it comes across like free advertising. But for now, anyway, we'll kind of do show a little. Yeah, there you go. It looks pretty good, I think. It looks pretty good. I have to say, I'm kind of proud of that. So we'll do that on the show here each and every day, at least for a little while anyway, in honor of those Tennessee Vols there. So we'll have some fun with that. By the way, R.S. Andrews, they love having fun as well. You can find them online, rsandrews.com. Your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. R.S. Andrews can be trusted to do all of that. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. It's one of the reasons why we love our friends at R.S. Andrews. One of the reasons why I'm very proud to recommend them. You can find them online yourself at rsandrews.com. I will start on YouTube here today. We'll take some comments there. We are not going to do comments very long today, though, and I apologize for that. We've got 3 shows. We've got a pre-record. So we are going to do a few comments quickly, and then we're going to move on. DMart42, glad to hear that you enjoy that. Donnie Wilkerson giving us a lousy stinking Gators. Appreciate that. Woody Trip 100 says, why would you decrease scholarships and talk about increasing the playoffs? Yeah, I'm not in favor of decreasing scholarships. I am not. DMart 42 says, has UGA Pro Day been scheduled? I haven't heard a date on that. I did hear where Alabama has scheduled theirs, but I have not heard a date on Georgia's yet. Silent Chaos says, now we only need an Auburn troll prop. Yeah, maybe we can get one of those here coming up here too. Not a bad idea. Let's see what else. Jordan Bowman bringing up an interesting point. It's always confusing to me. So for like the 2020 season, the national championship game is played in 2021, right? It's like some of the same stuff. You go back to like, old bowl games in the past for Georgia. It's like Georgia won the national championship in 1980, but it played Notre Dame in the Sugar Bowl in 1981. It's always kind of confusing to do that. Like, so when you think about Georgia in the Rose Bowl, did Georgia win the 2017 Rose Bowl because it came to the conclusion of the 2017 season, or did it win the 2018 Rose Bowl because it was played on January 1st, 2018? Those are some of the things that kind of keep me awake from time to time. GB2 says, I'll take that McDonald's bag on your desk. It's a true story. I had to actually purchase some McDonald's to get the bag, and I had not eaten McDonald's in probably years. It's good. I'm not going to lie to you. It's pretty good. Cody Ledoux says, Bama winning the SEC again, and our defensive backs coach coming in is going to be elite. So, Cody, I'm glad to know that all is well in Tuscaloosa land. Thank you for the update on that. Good to know that. I hope y'all told Terry and Arnold, though, that Carl Scott wasn't going to be there. While you were telling him about all the great things he was going to do playing basketball at Alabama, hope somebody kind of dropped it in there. That, oh, yeah, by the way, Carl Scott's going to the NFL. Hopefully somebody at Tuscaloosa was good enough to pass that along. I'm playing. I'm kidding. A couple more comments here for a moment. Matt Rugavina, yeah, that's a nice memory. DeMarco Thomas says, what's the latest on us getting a defensive back from the transfer portal? I think it's one of the important things to keep in mind on this right now is that not everyone who's going to be in the portal eventually is in there right now. So it could be that Georgia is taking a little bit of a wait-and-see approach in terms of, who else might actually enter the transfer portal before all is said and done. So some of this may be related to that we may see more names eventually in the portal who are not there right now. And so Georgia may be content to be patient on that for a while. Some of this may even happen post-spring. Remember, JT Daniels didn't arrive at Georgia until June. So we're a long way away from any kind of deadline on that happening. In fact, something happening prior to spring practice, if I had to guess, my guess is it's probably not. And we also, know Kirby Smart talked the other day about the chances that Georgia still adds a 2021 player of some kind. Dark Brook says, when does spring practice start? Like middle of March. Middle of March is the date on that. Couple more comments. We're going to have to get off the air a little bit early today. Ronald revels in the notion of competition, battling for playing time. Yeah, it's always a fun thing to be able to see. And, it's always, I think, really inspiring to see the guys who, do work their way up the ladder. And, we obviously talk a lot about five-star guys and things like that on a show like this, but the overwhelming number of guys who play in college football don't have those kinds of credentials. They really arrive on campus not knowing if they'll ever play at all, because plenty of players who look just like them never got their chance, never earned that playing time. So I think for the average player to place like Georgia who gets a chance to play, this is a player who's really had to fight and scratch to get that. He doesn't have the natural talent that makes it come easy for him, because only a few guys at the highest level of college football have the kind of talent that puts them head and shoulders above everybody else. For the most part, it's everybody in kind of a fair fight just to see who emerges. And so I have great respect for the guys who earn that playing time, because they do have to go through a lot to get it. They do. Miriam Martin Corbin on the Dogopoly. I have one of those, I think. Nick Roundtree says, to repost something from earlier, he says, I think UGA's 2022 draft will be solid. Right now, I think we see Daniels, Davis, Pickens go in the first round. That'd be a big step for Georgia. And if you can say, hey, those three guys are first-round picks, and then, as we said before, there's a little bit of a correlation with assuming, well, that means that Georgia must have been pretty good on the field in 2021 as well. Brian Self says, when is G-Day? It's like April 16th or 17th, whatever the Saturday is. I get the date confused, but it's like that 16th, 17th date. That's G-Day right there in April. Whichever one of those dates is a Saturday. Randy Hall, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Let's see what else is going on here. Joe Moody mentioning the possibility that Jamari Salyer could eventually be a first-round pick. Could be. DeMarco Thomas says, do I think it's going to be a G-Day game this year? Yeah, I do, and I think there'll be some fans there. I don't really know exactly what it looks like. I think more importantly also, Georgia probably gets something of a traditional spring practice as well, and that's going to be huge for this team. Huge. Daryl Toney says, can new committed recruits enter the transfer portal? I guess there's a rule that depends on when they basically arrive on campus. Like once they enroll and start school, at that point in time, they're kind of governed by the transfer portal. And I believe before they actually enroll in school, they're kind of governed by something a little bit different than that. They have a signed letter of intent, so they are, technically bound by that. But I think there's a little bit of a different threshold in terms of if you've enrolled and started school or if you haven't yet. Lucy Bowers-Boykin said something from Hugh. I didn't see that from Hugh. Didn't see that. Jermaine King says, ask Miriam what she thinks about Muschamp. I'm not sure I want to know that. Phil Rogers says, St. Augustine's building 5 new hotels. Should be ready there by October the 30th, 2021. Boy, that sounds like a pretty fun place to be for the cocktail party. I like where your thoughts are on that, for sure. GB2 says he thinks that Zamir White can shock the world for Georgia in 2021. I think there's a great chance that happens. I mean, I'm really excited about the running back depth that Georgia has. I think there's a way to use all those guys effectively. White, returning as the leading rusher, I think gives him a leg up there. But we've seen, James Cook used creatively, 80-yard touchdown catch against Alabama. Obviously more for Kendall Milton this year as well. I think it's going to be fun. That's going to be fun. Stephen Wainwright on the possibility that Clay Webb gets a chance to play this year. I certainly think he'll be competing for playing time. I do. Tristan West. Very funny. Very funny. Greg Spamaboy and the possibility that Zamir White could eventually become a first-round pick. Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly a chance of that. But he's going to have to do more. I mean, I don't think anyone denied that had White left this year, he would not have been a first-round pick. He's going to have to do more in the upcoming season. But, look at a guy like Nick Chubb, who's obviously having a great NFL career. I think his NFL draft status went way up. And he wasn't a first-round pick. It was taken early in the second round. But I think his draft status went way up because of what he did in his final season at Georgia. So there's a little bit of a precedent for that. DMart42 says Cook will be the first Dog running back off the board next year, and there's obviously a chance that happens. Richard D says, with the current trend of decline of COVID, when do you think DawgNation tailgates will resume? That's a great question. So obviously I can't answer that right now because, you mentioned the trends. It's hard to know exactly where those are going yet. Here's a fair question, and I don't know the answer to this. How many fans would there have to be in Clemson for the upcoming year? I should say in Charlotte against Clemson for the upcoming year for us to do an event in Charlotte before that game? That's a really good question. It's important to note that we couldn't have even done a tailgate last year because in a place like Athens, like most places around college football, they weren't allowing any tailgating whatsoever. That if you went to a lot of these games, there was almost nothing happening on the streets, on the parking lots before the game. There were even some moments around Athens where they weren't even letting you put chairs out next to your car. It seemed like that was kind of, inconsistently enforced maybe, but there was just this very quiet atmosphere around these stadiums that the few fans that were allowed to attend, they were expected to just kind of drive, park, get out, go inside the stadium. And that's kind of all there was. So I think the ability of us to host events and do things like that is going to depend on just how much, I guess, freedom is opened up for kind of doing things in parking lots before the games. And obviously, as you said before, you have optimism that we're trending in a better spot for this upcoming fall than we were this previous fall. But that's one of the big issues there is just how normal the atmosphere around the stadium is even going to be able to be. GB2 says, I missed the dog walk. Yeah, it was crazy to be there, to watch the team arrive. First of all, at Arkansas, you couldn't even get within 300 yards of the team coming in. Even some of the parents I was with, player parents, before that game, even their own sons, they weren't allowed to get within 3 football fields of the team as they were driving in the bus. Some of the other stadiums were a little more lax than that. But it was very weird to see the team arrive, get off the bus, and just walk in. No cheering fans, none of that kind of stuff. It was very, 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 very strange. GB2 says North Carolina is strict on COVID rules right now, so that's another thing to keep in mind is different states do have different attitudes about that. Jalen Jackson looking forward to Adam Anderson. Boy, that's a fun name to think about for the upcoming year. Johnny Lester says the Dogs roster is loaded. Finally have a big arm quarterback, so Johnny excited too. Jay Shipe says all of us in our 40s had the best media coverage of star athletes without them being taken down by social media. Yeah, some of that is not fun. I would say in some cases, social media and the enhanced attention that some athletes get can end up being a fun thing. For instance, there are Georgia players like, for whatever reason, Jordan Davis comes to mind, guys like that who maybe because of social media, you end up liking them more because you know more about them. And in other cases, as you said before, that loss of privacy probably caused you to think a little bit different about them than you otherwise would. I think that's probably a fair point. Jordan Bowman says North Carolina still has a curfew. That's interesting. Michael Porter, good to see you. 1 or 2 more, and we're going to go. Nick Roundtree also looking for a big year from Adam Anderson. Trip Mitchell says he's been working in North Carolina. He says there's nothing all that special going on there when it comes to that. So thank you for the update on that, Trip. Let's see what else. Nick Roundtree says the absence of fans of the dog walk felt like The Walking Dead. Yeah, it was weird late in the season. The Auburn game felt like just kind of a mini version of any other Georgia football game. It's big atmosphere. It's really fun. By the time you got later in the year, it felt really strange. You could be very close to the stadium and not even know that a game was taking place. It just was really, really, you understand why. But the late season home games were bizarre. It was just so bizarre. It was just really strange. And as I said before, I totally understand why it was, but it was really strange. Yeah, Miriam Martin Corbin says she's no fan of Will Muschamp's. So Muschamp better be careful crossing our Miriam Martin Corbin here. Sheldon Tucker, so negative. He says, starting off with Clemson and losing the game week 1. Come on, Sheldon. Come on, Shelton. Be a little more positive. William Perry says the Bama game was pretty weird too. Yeah, it was, because you obviously know what Tuscaloosa can be like for a regular atmosphere. It was all pretty strange. It was just really all pretty strange. Johnny Lester, thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate that. We are going to get ready to go for today. Do have a few things we have to do, so my apologies for getting off what I think is a little early. Is this earlier than normal? Let me see. Yeah, a little earlier, not too bad. But either way, thanks for being here as part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Make sure you check out my friends at the AJC for your Atlanta news now. A lot of really interesting stuff going on there. You can stay up to date on all the things going on. And, the coronavirus variant you may have heard a little bit about. There's up to 37 cases now of that in the state of Georgia. What does that mean? Let's get the facts we need on that online at ajc.com. Also, update on the Georgia facility stuff. Georgia getting ready to open up, move into that new football facility right after G-Day. Sounds like that's going to be ready. Interesting stuff from my buddy Chip over there, ajc.com on that. And how does the retention, I should say, of Marcelo Osuna impact the Atlanta Braves and their attempt to keep pace with the Mets in the National League East, the Dodgers in the National League. Good stuff on that online, ajc.com as well. So get your Atlanta news now from ajc.com. Also, some great takeout stuff for Valentine's Day, too. Don't forget about that. ajc.com for that as well. Thanks for being here for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Check out R.S. Andrews. Heating system, get it tuned back up to factory fresh spec. Stay warm. Time to start thinking about that air conditioning unit as well. Pretty soon, you're going to be turning those back on again. It will be spring, so get ready to go on that. Find all the great stuff at R.S. Andrews. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric online at rsandrews.com. You have a great day. Thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. See you back here tomorrow. Live show tomorrow, so just like normal tomorrow. See you there at 10 a.m. DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG. We'll look forward to seeing you then, everybody.